I'm delighted to introduce, in her first official function as the ambassador from Canada, newly appointed and sworn in a couple of hours ago, Deborah Lyons, to bring greetings.
Well, thank you so much. This is impromptu. I wanted to come and say hello to all the members of the Academy, but at least I'm official. So you are my first function, my first gathering as an official Canadian ambassador to Israel. Bob was mentioning to us that this morning you could hear some of the anthems being played. And so as you were hearing those, I was probably walking along the carpet hoping that I wouldn't trip in these shoes that I shouldn't have worn, because the carpet is over this uneven stone, and we were warned by protocol, please don't wear high heels, but I mean, you had to. So it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony, I have to say, done very much in the way Israelis do things so well. It had that formality and elegance to it, but it was casual, warm, very engaging and very friendly, and President Rivlin was fantastic, as he always is. So yes, I am now official, but I have been on the ground for 2.5 months, and although I don't know if I should say on the ground, because it seems to me we've been flying pretty much since I arrived. Very sadly, I arrived on a Tuesday, and former President Perez died during that night, which was very sad because I had followed him for years, and I would have loved to have met the man and been in his presence. At least I got to attend his funeral and feel the incredible affection and respect and admiration that people had for him. But what it did mean was that, and you are all brilliant professors and academics, so you know how one has to sometimes perform in front of a challenge and reassure people that you know what you're doing. So in less than 36 hours, my Prime Minister arrived. My former Prime Minister arrived, my Prime Minister before him arrived, along with the head of opposition, along with a number of our senators, and along with our Minister of Foreign Affairs. They all arrived around 2 o'clock in the morning. I met their plane after having been on the ground for 36 hours and had to brief them on Israel. So baptism by fire doesn't even come close to describing how it felt. But it was incredible because we got to participate in a wonderful experience and share that celebration of Perez's incredible life and his incredible understanding of war, of insecurity, of security, of peace, of cultures, of people coming together, of coexistence. And for our Prime Minister Trudeau, of course, Perez's life example, I think, was something that he held very dearly. And I should tell the Canadians who are here that it was a very interesting experience being at the VVIP tent the morning of the funeral, where, you know, you're bumping into David Cameron and the President of Mexico and Prince Charles and everyone else who has come to celebrate this wonderful man. And you're seeing your own Prime Minister, who'd been in office for less than a year, young by everyone's standards, stand out in that crowd of international leaders. And it was very interesting because often when you're in those settings, you're trying to take care of your dignitary and make sure that your dignitary is getting to meet people and going and gathering people to come and chat with him and or her, and make them feel, you know, very engaged. With Prime Minister Trudeau, we had to form a block to keep the queue from overpowering him. And this was not young girls looking to have selfies. This was one after another of world leaders who wanted to meet the young Canadian Prime Minister and hear his message and talk to him about his message of coexistence, of hope, of believing in people, of tolerance, of dignity, of acceptance, of pluralism. And I got to stand beside him when he had many of these conversations, and I can tell you, he really held his own. So it was kind of a magnificent day, my first real function as a non-official ambassador, to be there to both honor an incredible man like Shimon Peres, who, as I said, has been an example for me, and then to be with our own Prime Minister and see how he performs on the world stage. And as we all know, we need people on the world stage these days who really are bringing messages of hope and respect and human dignity and tolerance and coexistence. I'm not quite sure what's happening to our world. I have been a diplomat for 20 plus years, and I have been working for government much longer than that. And I was a scientist before I started working for government. And I have to say, I have never felt so concerned about our world. Except maybe for some of you who are almost as old as I am, who can remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was a scary moment. But the world is very fragile, it seems, and a bit shaky and a bit wobbly. So here I am finding myself in Israel, a country that is so magnificent. I refer to it as a magnificent miracle. Next year, Canada will celebrate 150 years. The following year, Israel will celebrate 70 years. And there's so much, I think, in our two countries that can be a good example to the world. Of course, we're not perfect. Of course, we've got issues. And we're working through those issues, sometimes with great difficulty, sometimes taking an awful long time, as Canada's struggle with resolving its history with the Aboriginal people, with our First Nations, as we try to reconcile there. And Israel with so many things that it is having to deal with in this very interesting region that is going through such dynamic change. So I feel incredibly challenged, but amazingly honored and privileged to be the ambassador at this particular time. I will share with you, I have 4 main priorities at the embassy, which we can talk about another time, but I will share with you one priority in particular that is near and dear to my heart, because I think in so many ways you have already, with the work that you've been doing by coming together as the Academy, sharing one another's knowledge, giving knowledge to the world, which is what universities do. It must be an incredible thing to create knowledge. I hope you go home dancing every night. It must be amazing to create knowledge. Must be a little bit like light, lifting the light a little higher. So one of the things that is very important to me in my time here is going to be talking to Canadians about Israel and helping Canadians understand Israel in a broader context, maybe even in a new way. I think too often the conversation about Israel has been too narrow. And there have been so many magnificent, incredible things happening here. And so we are launching an intensive communications effort to talk to Canadians about Israel. And likewise, Israelis need to understand more about Canada. There is a huge temptation on the part of Israelis, especially the business world and the innovation world. When they think of going beyond Israel, they think of the US. They particularly think of Silicon Valley, Boston, New York. And we have to, I think, help Israelis understand that incredible country to the north that really, by every indicator you look at, whether you're looking at Forbes, The Economist, OECD, World Bank, whatever entity you're looking at, they will tell you that Canada is one of the best countries in the world for lifestyle, for business, for innovation, for education, for culture, for quality of life. So we need to talk to Israelis about Canada as well. So one of the things that we're doing is we're launching this intensive campaign, and we were trying to figure out what to call it recently. And I realized that with all of the attention we've had on Israel recently, we've had our Prime Minister here, we've had our Governor General here with the accompanying delegation, we've had the Mayor of Montreal, the Mayor of Toronto, the BC Minister of Finance, and 160 of their closest colleagues, friends, business leaders. We've had a number of people here from the Conference Board of Canada, we've had our National Security Advisor, we have had our Deputy Minister of Public Safety, our head of CSIS, our head of the Canadian Security Establishment, and about 3 or 4 other delegations that I am forgetting, and that is in the last 2.5 months. So I have had well over 350 Canadians, and that's not counting you folks. Now I'm adding you. So there certainly is a tension happening, but what we hear often when we talk to folks who come and visit Israel, especially on a number of these delegations, is people go, wow, wow, Israel. And so our campaign is, wow, Israel. And that will be this intense social media push that we will be getting out to Canadians, of course, in French and English, and here in Israel, in English and in Hebrew, and some Arabic as well, to talk about Wow Canada. So I would just mention that to all of you because you are working in a wide range of disciplines and studies, and you're working and sharing with your Israeli counterparts, and the extent to which you can be helpful to us by giving us your insights and some of your wisdom, we would be happy to share that with the many Canadians and Israelis that we'll be talking to. I wanted to drop in today when I knew that that you were meeting, and I am really sorry that I didn't get here earlier in the afternoon, but we were held up with the protocol office, and I've asked a couple of the presenters to send me their papers. And Bob is making sure that I'm going home with a heavy book to read, so that's all good. But I also want to give you an invitation, certainly to those of you working here in Israel, but also to the Canadians coming back, and definitely to Chad, the Academy, when you return again. One thing I have just obtained recently is a wonderful new residence, official residence in downtown Tel Aviv, right next to City Hall, actually right next to Rubin Square. It's a wonderful location. It has a fantastic roof terrace that gives you a wonderful view of the Tel Aviv skyline, and which is really impressive. And you can look out to the sea. And we have a wonderful reception space and a wonderful meeting space. So I really, truly, sincerely mean this. People look at me a little, as the British say, gobsmacked, when I make this offer. But truly, I would be honored if you would think of using it. If you're having an event in Tel Aviv and you would like to use our space for a presentation or for a reception, you would only enhance our reputation by using it for one of your academic gatherings. And certainly the Royal Academy, when you return from Canada, I would be very upset, like your mother would get upset, if we couldn't host you there. So please keep that in mind. I should stop because I've gone on much longer. As I was saying, I would have been a great university professor because I love to talk. But instead I became a diplomat. I didn't have the discipline that you all have. But I congratulate you on your exploration, on your contribution of knowledge, and on your meeting here today. I do look forward to getting papers from a couple of the presenters. And certainly next year, when you gather again. I look forward to hosting you at my home in Tel Aviv. So thank you all. I will be here for 3 years. Wish me luck. It's been a wonderful, wonderful, fast ride so far. Thank you all.
If you'd been a professor, you'd have spoken for 50 minutes. Thank you very much. Good luck. Thank you for dropping by. And best wishes for a successful tenure. And we shall see you. Thank you, Sigmund.
Yes, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so good evening and welcome to the last session of the first day of our conference, Literature and History, A Look from the Margins. And our speaker now will be Margalit Finkelberg. Margalit Finkelberg is Professor Emerita of Classics at Tel Aviv University. She is a member of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities and the recipient of the Rothschild Prize in the Humanities for 2012. She has authored The Birth of Literary Fiction in Ancient Greece, Oxford University Press, 1998, Greeks and Pre-Greeks, Aegean Prehistory and Greek Heroic Tradition, Cambridge University Press, 2005, and Paperback, 2009, Homer, Tel Aviv University Press, 2014 in Hebrew, and over 80 scholarly articles. She is a co-editor with Gigi Strumza of Homer, the Bible and Beyond, Literary and Religious Canons in the Ancient World, Brill, 2003, and the editor of the Homer Encyclopedia, 3 volumes, Wiley Blackwell, 2011. She is now finishing a book on narrator and narrative in Plato's Dialogues. And the title of a lecture this evening will be Neither Literature Nor History, Homer and Vergil as Foundational Texts. So.
Thank you very much. First of all, like all of you, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers of this seminar, and also express my gratitude for your invitation to give this talk. And it is especially important for me that this is a seminar organized together with the Royal Society of Canada, because Canada is very dear to my heart for more than one reason. My first international fellowship ever was at the Memorial University of Newfoundland many years ago. And my last fellowship up to date was at the University of British Columbia. So, and in the middle there were talks and conferences at Halifax, Montreal, Winnipeg, Victoria. So classics is very strong in Canada, and you may be proud with your classical colleagues. This is not to say that I disagree with the subtitle of this seminar, Voice from the Margins, for a different reason than Sinai, who talked this morning. Once the central, if not the only, discipline of the humanities, today the classics is receding, just as digital humanities is an upcoming discipline in humanities. Classics is shrinking, but it is receding in a dignified way, I would say, and I am sure that it will never disappear, for the simple reason that in one way or another, it is in the genes of the Western civilization, and today also of the global civilization. And this is not just a word, global. For example, in a recent campaign, we, the classicists, had to save the Department of Greek at the Copenhagen University, the most passionate voice in defense of classics came from Ghana, from African classicists who spoke for the importance of the classical studies for human civilization in general. So, and somehow it is also a part of my story, so it's better to begin. I can speak about classics a long time. In the late 1st century of the Common Era, Homer was proclaimed a liar. All credit goes to Dio of Prusa, an illustrious orator who in his Trojan oration uniquely represented the Trojans as the victors in the Trojan War. According to Dio, Troy was never sacked by the Greeks. In fact, it is the Greeks who lost the war because of their unprovoked attack on Troy. Dio repeatedly praises the Trojans and elevates Aeneas, a hero virtually ignored by the other Greek authors. At the end of the speech, he asserts that the truth about the Trojan War can now be told because, quote, the situation has changed, for Greece is subject to others, and so is Asia, end quote. The others are, of course, the Romans. It is not out of the question that Dio's speech was meant as a rhetorical exercise rather than a serious treatment of the Trojan theme. The important thing, however, is that the Trojan oration was part of a trend. This trend embraced not only such acknowledged masterpieces as Lucian's True Stories and Philostratus' Heroicus, but also two accounts of the Trojan War written in Greek prose somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd centuries CE. The history of the destruction of Troy by so-called Darius the Phrygian, and the Journal of the Trojan War by Dictys of Crete. Both Darius' history and Dictys' journal are emphatically presented as eyewitness accounts, and therefore as far superior to Homer. This started long before Ranke. Ranke was quoted today. Thus, in the preface to Darius' book, written by one Cornelius Nepos, it's not a real Cornelius Nepos, who presumably found the document, we find, I quote, "Thus, my readers can know exactly what happened according to this account, and judge for themselves whether Darius the Phrygian or Homer wrote the more truthfully. Darius, who lived and fought at the time the Greeks stormed Troy, or Homer, who was born long after the war was over." Although undeniable forgeries, these two compositions were to become the authoritative sources on the Trojan War for a millennium and a half. This is apropos original and reliable documents. Their overwhelming popularity was mainly due to the Latin translation, apparently made in the 4th and 5th centuries CE. As a result, Dictys and Darius became, as one scholar put it, the foundational text of Trojan historiography, and it was destined to last for centuries. But the new vision of the Trojan War, as proclaimed by Dio and promulgated by Dictys and Darius, could hardly have met such wide acceptance were it not for Vergil's Aeneid, written about a century before Dio. Although he never called Homer a liar or reversed the story time fixed in the Homeric poems, Vergil, who both imitated Homer and emulated him, accomplished a thorough revision of the picture of the Trojan conflict that Homer bestowed. The picture of the Trojan War presented by Dictys and Darius went very well indeed with what could be found in the Aeneid, the most revered text which continued to be read, admired, and imitated throughout the Latin Middle Ages and beyond. it would be no exaggeration to say that the influence of Dictys and Darius could never be so widespread without the endorsement of the Aeneid. Now, both Homer and Vergil are poets, and their epics are universally recognized literary masterpieces. Why then were these works of literature received in Greece and Rome and later in the medieval and early modern Europe as sources of historical knowledge? What happened to the distinction between history and poetry drawn by Aristotle in the Poetics? And where are the works of historians which circulated in abundance in both Greece and Rome? Why is the Aeneid and not, say, the Roman antiquities of Vergil's contemporary Dionysius of Halicarnassus that provided the authoritative picture of Roman history for generations to come? The answer lies in the special place, first of Homer and then of Vergil in the Greco-Roman civilization. How did they acquire this place, and by what means was it sustained? Let us throw a closer look at each of the texts in question. When the author of Darius's history claims that Homer lived many years after the Trojan War, he uses the information that Homer himself supplies. Homer never pretends to speak from within the period he describes. What he claims is that, thanks to his contact with the Muses, he faithfully preserves the memory of the past. And indeed, he makes a considerable effort to provide a coherent and trustworthy picture of an epoch which was recognizably different from his own. The Greeks are designated by their ancient name Achaeans rather than Hellenes, as in historical times. Their cities are ruled by kings and do not resemble at all the city-states of historical Greece. Chariots, which played no role in historical Greek warfare, are actively involved in the military campaign, and so on. Above all, the fact that the metalware is consistently represented as made of bronze points out unequivocally that Homer purposely tried to reproduce a distant historical period, the one in which the leading metal had been bronze rather than iron. This is not to say, of course, that his historical reconstruction was consistent in every respect. Contradictions and anachronisms are numerous, but this does not change the fact that the Iliad and the Odyssey were conceived and executed as accounts of a distant past and were accepted as such. What kind of past was it? The traditional poetry of the Greeks celebrated the heroic age. This was a time when men were bigger and stronger, and they performed marvelous feats of prowess. The gods kept company with mortals, and even consorted with mortal women and conceived sons with them. This is why the heroes of Greek legend, mortal though they were considered divine offspring, demigods. They belonged to a special race, the race of heroes, and often became immortal after their deaths. The heroic age came to an end in the Trojan War, which was especially designed by Zeus to put an end to the race of heroes. Many heroes lost their lives in the war, whereas those who survived did not return home but went elsewhere, eventually to disappear from the view. The race of heroes was replaced by the race of iron, that of ordinary mortals. Sounds like Tolkien, doesn't it? There can be little doubt that the myth of the end of the Age of Heroes purported to commemorate the collapse of Mycenaean Greece at the end of the second millennium BCE. Yet, the event that, according to the epic tradition, brought forward the end of the race of heroes was not the fall of Mycenae or any other major city of Bronze Age Greece, but the siege of Troy, a non-Greek city on the other side of the Aegean. It goes without saying that whatever the nature of the events underlying the Trojan saga, they cannot account for the destruction levels and depopulation attested in mainland Greece for this period. That is to say, the momentous events that brought about the end of the Mycenaean civilization have been replaced in the mainstream Greek tradition by the story of the Trojan War that destroyed the race of heroes. a mythological construction which was apparently considered as offering a more satisfactory explanation of the transition of Greece from prehistory to history. How should we account for this phenomenon? Everything points in the direction that the tradition of the Trojan War rose to the Pan-Hellenic circulation in the early Iron Age, certainly not later than the 8th century BCE. This was a period of great transformations in the Greek world. After the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization some 400 years earlier, Greece entered a period which is still often referred to as the Dark Age. Alongside depopulation and dramatic decline in material culture, this period was characterized by new developments in the political, social, religious, and cultural spheres. The results of these developments found their expression in an unprecedented revival that took place in the 8th century. Among the landmarks of this revival were the abolishment of kingship and establishment of the new polity of the city-state, polis, the adoption of the self-identification Hellenes, the introduction of the new pantheon common to all the Greeks, the institution of the Pan-Hellenic cult of Zeus at Olympia, the institution of the hero cult, the adoption and adaptation of the West Semitic alphabet, the colonization movement. All this occurred simultaneously with the spreading of epic poems about the Trojan War all over the Greek world. The common denominator of the historical developments that culminated in the great changes of the 8th century BCE was the consolidation of collective identity. It should be taken into account in this connection that, as a result of the population movements that shook the Eastern Mediterranean at the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, the ethnic composition of the population groups that found themselves on the territory of Greece at the beginning of the 1st millennium was markedly heterogeneous. After the collapse of Mycenaean Greece, large parts of its population had abandoned Greek soil and settled in new places all over the Mediterranean, first and foremost in Asia Minor. Their lands had been taken by population groups from the northern parts of the Balkan Peninsula. Although these newly arrived populations, most, but by no means all of them, of Dorian origin, also spoke Greek, they had taken no part in Mycenaean civilization. The Dorians were distinguished by their dialect and by their political, social, and religious institutions. Upon their arrival, they seized large territories in southern Greece and founded new political entities of Sparta, Argos, and Messenia. The new population groups settled side by side with what remained of the old population of the land. As a result, at the beginning of the 1st millennium BCE, the population of Greece consisted of both newcomers from the north and a considerable residue of the old population. These two population groups sharply differed in their history, traditions, and customs. Yet, the common geographical space and the common language they spoke formed a suitable background for consolidation of a new collective identity. The Homeric poems contributed to this process by actively shaping this population's collective memory. They unambiguously presented all the constituents of historical Greece as taking part in a common military enterprise, the Trojan War, which was fought against a foreign enemy and took place far away from the mainland Greece. Thus, from the very beginning, the epic tradition of the Trojan War was intended to adapt the turbulent picture of the past to the new self-image of a consolidated and homogeneous Hellenic commonwealth which emerged in the early archaic period. This was a self-conscious cultural strategy whose objective was not so much commemoration of the past as rather the establishment of usable ideological foundations for the present and the future. A foundational myth was born. We should not forget, however, that claiming a special status and attaining such a status are two different things. Only the combination of the text's claim to a special status and the community's granting it such a status would result in the text attaining a privileged position in the community in question. This is exactly what happened when the poems of Homer became regularly recited at the prestigious Panathenaic festival, which was among the central religious and cultural events of the public life of Athens and of the whole of Greece. They also became the basis of elementary education to be memorized at schools all over the Greek world. This is not to say that Homer cannot be used as a source of historical information. It should not be forgotten that we owe our very knowledge of the existence of Mycenaean Greece to the stimulus that the poems of Homer furnished to Schliemann and others almost 150 years ago. As Martin Nielsen demonstrated in the 1930s, the cities identified by Homer as capitals of the kingdoms of heroic Greece were significant Mycenaean sites. Moreover, the comparative evidence makes it abundantly manifest that whenever a heroic tradition can be correlated with written evidence, it can often be shown to have preserved a memory of momentous historical events, such as wars, migrations, or foreign invasions. It would therefore be anachronistic to approach epic tradition with modern criteria of historicity and, as a result, to deny it all historical basis whatsoever. To quote the Chronology of Oral Tradition by David Henniger, no one who has worked extensively with oral materials will deny their value as historical sources. End quote. It seems, however, that the real historical significance of the myth of the Trojan War lies in the myth itself. Whatever its historical myth of the ancient Greek civilization from its dawn in the 8th century BCE, CE. In this respect, at least, the myth of the Trojan War can be considered a historical fact. For a myth shared by an entire nation is a major component of this nation's history. Its significance does not yield to the significance of historical events in the narrow sense of the word, and perhaps even surpasses them. The institutionalized adoption of the myth of the Trojan War, which shaped the collective memory of the Greek civilization and consolidated its identity for centuries to come, has proved more important from the historical point of view than a distant military conflict whose particular circumstances were lost to the depths of time. The more so, as the Greek civilization was not only one shaped by the Trojan myth. So, Roman reception of Greek cultural tradition was anything but passive or straightforward. After the first wave of translations and adaptations that took place in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, remaking and rethinking of Greek sources became the normal practice. This gradually led to their replacement by a new literary production cast in Latin language. Homer was superseded by Vergil, Hesiod and Ovid by Vergil again, Sappho, Pindar and Callimachus by Catullus and Horace, Sophocles and Euripides by Seneca, and so on. Still, even when approached against this background, Roman reception of Homer was a special case. On the one hand, it is highly symptomatic that the Odyssea, the translation of the Homeric Odyssey by Livius Andronicus, 3rd century BCE, was the first literary epic to appear in Latin. On the other hand, at approximately the same time, or perhaps even earlier, the Romans, who aspired to acquire a prestigious past by securing a place within Greek heroic tradition, started to identify themselves as descendants of the defeated Trojans. This identification became especially prominent in the middle of the 1st century BCE, with the rise to power of Caesar and Augustus, who claimed to descend from Aeneas through his son Iulus. The silver denarius of Caesar, showing Aeneas leaving Troy, minted in 47-46 BCE, is emblematic in this respect. His son Iulus is there, and what he keeps in his hand is a statue of the goddess Athena, Palladium. It's the early iconography of this event. Anyway, this was the first time when Aeneas replaced Romulus on a Roman coin. This also signalized the beginning of a new era in the reception of the Trojan myth. As already mentioned, the text, which was destined radically to transform the attitude to the tradition of the Trojan War, was Vergil's Aeneid. Vergil not only unreservedly adopted the new vision of the Roman past, which privileged the myth of the Trojan descent over the old foundational myth with Romulus as a single founding figure. He also changed the received picture of the Trojan War by presenting the Greeks, by that time conquered by Rome, as inferior to the Trojans, and by all too obvious extrapolation to the Romans as well. Consider, for example, the reaction of the ghosts of the Greek participants in the Trojan War at Aeneas' appearance in the underworld. It's Aeneid, Book 6. Quote, "But the Greek chieftains and the massed ranks whom Agamemnon had led trembled in violent panic at the sight of their foe with his armor glittering amid the shadows. Some turned to flee as before they had fled to their ships, while others raised a whispering voice. But their attempt at a battle cry left their mouths idly gaping." Unquote. Greek leaders trembling before a Trojan. Such was the perspective on the relationship Troy-Greece that Vergil established. As we shall see immediately, this perspective was destined to supersede that of Homer and to become, at least in the Latin West, a standard version of the beginnings of European history. Now, although the myth of Trojan ancestry was enormously enhanced by Vergil, it was not invented by him. Nor can this myth be entirely identified with the aspirations of the Julio-Claudian dynasty founded by Augustus. As already mentioned, the identification with the Trojans began centuries earlier, at the very dawn of Roman history. Whatever its historical background, it is clear that the main motive of this identification was to claim a place of honor in the company of the civilized peoples, first and foremost the Greeks, by finding a place of their own in the story of the Trojan War. Yet, when Vergil's contemporary, the historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who also worked in the Augustan Rome, tried to introduce the idea of Greek origins of the Romans and even argued that the Trojans were in fact Greeks, this idea was obviously not good enough to become universally accepted. What Vergil did, and what was accepted with enthusiasm, was the introduction of the idea of the superiority of Rome over Greece. This is the reason why, although Vergil's picture of the Trojan War was created to suit specific historical circumstances, it became so authoritative as to outlive the Julio-Claudian dynasty with its imagined Trojan ancestry. Even more remarkable is the fact that Vergil's picture of the Trojan War outlived the Roman Empire itself. The earliest attribution of Trojan origins to a northern European people is attested as early as the mid-7th century CE. The people in question were the Franks. with the Britons following in their steps 150 years later. Throughout the Middle Ages, more and more peoples, states, and dynasties lay claim to Trojan ancestry. Venice, Sicily, Tuscany, Naples, Calabria, the Danes, the Normans, the Belgae, the Saxons, the German emperors, the Capetians, and this is just a partial list. Like the Romans centuries before them, the peoples of Europe bypassed their original foundational myths, striving to gain in prestige by joining the circle of the peoples whose history had begun with the Trojan War. As the medievalist R. Wassow put it, the foundational myths of Trojan origins were quite remarkably Vergilian. More than anything else, the popularity of Vergil's historical vision was due to the lasting dialogue with the Roman past that ran deeply in the veins of the Western civilization. This dialogue involved both identification with Rome and challenge to its authority. The first found its expression in the myth of Trojan ancestry, the second in the adoption of Hector rather than Aeneas as a model hero. Achilles and Odysseus, on the other hand, were neglected or vilified. As Catherine King put it, quote, "The Trojans were considered to be the ancestors of most European peoples, while Achilles and Odysseus were the representatives of the somewhat untrustworthy eastern half of Christendom." They were Greeks. Unquote. So much so that the myth of Trojan ancestry could even serve for justification of the Latin conquest of Constantinople in 1204. All this created a suitable background for the revisionist attitude towards Homer's picture of the Trojan War, not only to be perpetuated, but also to be taken further. In 1160, Benoit de Saint-Maur made the account of Darius and, to a lesser degree, Dictys, the basis for his 30,000 verse long Le Roman de Troie. The poem consistently represented Hector as a supreme hero and the Trojans as unambiguously superior to the Greeks. Achilles, on the other hand, became an object of vilification. The popularity of Le Roman de Troie was overwhelming. It was soon translated into Spanish and German, adapted into French prose, and used as a basis for Italian poems. Since the early 13th century, Historia Destructionis Troiae, the Latin translation of Le Roman de Troie by Guido delle Colonne, became no less popular and was adapted as frequently. In the subsequent centuries, the picture of the Trojan War, established in Le Roman de Troie and Historia Destructionis Troiae, prevailed in both high and popular culture. It influenced Dante, Chaucer, and Shakespeare. The popular medieval list of the 9 worthies featured Hector as one of the 3 foremost heroes of pagan antiquity, the other 2 being Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. The picture of the past is established by Vergil was so authoritative that as late as 1714, the French scholar Nicolas Fréret was imprisoned in the Bastille for presenting in the at the Academy of Inscriptions an argument according to which the Franks were of South German rather than Trojan origin. Fréret's argument was, of course, entirely sound from the historical point of view. Nevertheless, the historian spent 3 months in prison for presenting a scientific alternative to the imagined picture of the past, which was entirely founded on literary sources. In his influential book, Did the Greeks Believe in Their Myths?, Paul Vane outlined what he calls programs of truth. These are the socially constructed criteria by which every culture negotiates ideas of truth and falsehood. Alternative programs of truth, such as legend versus history, myth versus everyday life, may well exist alongside one another without producing contradiction. As far as the myth of the Trojan War is concerned, Vane's model works quite well in the case of Rome, where two mutually exclusive founder figures, the aboriginal Romulus and the borrowed Aeneas, could be evoked simultaneously, evidently with no contradiction to be felt. Greece, however, was a different matter. There was no alternative program of truth as far as the historicity of Homer's account of the Trojan War was concerned. Even the historians were not excluded from this rule. Thus, at the beginning of his history, Herodotus parodically presents the early history of the antagonism between the Greeks and the East as a series of abductions of women. First, the Phoenicians kidnapped Io. The Greeks reciprocated by kidnapping Europe from Phoenicia. But they did not stop at that. They also kidnapped Medea from Colchis, and it was this last transgression that was reciprocated by Paris, who kidnapped Helen. The Greeks reacted disproportionately, and this is how the Trojan War began. Note that while parodizing the Trojan myth and the Homeric poems which served as its main vehicle, Herodotus at the same time does not question the basic facts of this myth. The same would be true of his younger contemporary Thucydides. This is how, for example, this critical historian begins his discussion of the Homeric catalogue of ships. Quote, "And we may fairly suppose the Trojan expedition to have been greater than any which preceded it, although according to Homer, if we may once more appeal to his testimony, not equal to those of our own day. He was a poet and may therefore be expected to exaggerate. Yet, even upon his showing, the expedition was comparatively small." Unquote. By a careful analysis of the figures supplied by Homer, Thucydides arrives at a much more modest estimate of the number of warriors involved in the Trojan campaign. Yet, although he criticizes Homer for his lack of precision, Thucydides too never doubts the historicity of the Trojan War. Moreover, he takes it for granted that the Trojan War was the first genuinely pan-Hellenic enterprise in Greek history. No wonder that later historians were regularly starting their compositions with reference to the Trojan War, an event which was universally believed to have stood at the beginning of history. Now, while historians, especially Herodotus, were often called liars in antiquity, Homer, though criticized by some for his religion, for the behavior of his heroes, or for the lack of advanced knowledge in his poems, had never been envisaged as a liar. That is, never until Dio of Prusa, a citizen of the Roman Empire, in which a new program of truth was beginning to run. To conclude, although it is generally taken for granted that in antiquity Homer and Vergil enjoy the status of canonical texts, their canonicity is usually approached in terms of the literary canon. It seems to me, however, that it would be incorrect to treat the canonicity of Homer and Vergil as being of the same order as the canonicity of, say, Euripides or Ovid. The Iliad and the Odyssey on the one hand and the Aeneid on the other functioned in Greco-Roman antiquity as well as in medieval and early modern Europe, not just as literary texts. They were bearers of the historical myths which played a pivotal role in the civilizations to which they belonged. This is not yet to say that Homer and Vergil should be regarded as historical texts in the proper sense of the word, or were regarded as such in ancient sources. They were placed beyond the distinction between the factual and the fictional. The Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid were approached as neither literary nor historical, but rather as the foundational texts, which themselves became factors in history and thus acquired a special status, comparable to the status of the Bible, the Quran, the Declaration of Independence, and other pre-modern and modern texts which played the decisive role in the formation of the collective identities of large population groups. Thank you very much. Yeah. Actually, we can.
Okay, so just, no, we still have Okay, we might have some time for questions or comments. If you don't have much time, but if you have anything you'd like to say or ask. Yeah, please. Okay, yeah, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very much interested by your concept of foundational text. And my question is a very simple one. Is it possible to deconstruct foundational text, and is it appropriate to deconstruct foundational text?
Do you ask about our situation or the original situation?
Whatever situation you want.
I don't. I think that these are two very different situations. What I did is more or less a deconstruction. I showed that it was I hope I have showed that actually it was not fabricated, perhaps too strong word, but it was shaped. The history was shaped in a certain direction, and no problem with that. I think it's of course it is possible, but actually this is how we are earning our bread. But as far as real time is concerned, there were not historical Plato. For example, Plato tried very hard. He was not interested in history. No one actually doubted the historicity of the Trojan War. It's no question about that. But for example, Plato criticized Homer and Hesiod also. I think we have very clear intention to replace the literary canon with a philosophical canon, because up to the time of Plato, it's the 4th century BC, Homer was the educator of Greece, and Plato challenged this position with no success, because Homer still stayed in the center of Greek education. But historically, it was never challenged until this new trend, indeed, in the so-called second sophistics, in the 2nd century CE, in the Roman Empire, started by the Greeks, citizens of the Roman Empire. And yes, you may call it a deconstruction, and yes, it is a deconstruction, but obviously it was actually in favor of another myth or another version of history. Yes. So yes, the answer is yes. Thank you.
It was magnificent, tour de force. But right from the beginning, I suspected that, no, it's something about the Bible, and then you came out with it. In other words, what you were saying at the end is that the Hebrew Bible, in fact, works the same way, especially in Israel. This is our foundation myth. And of course, we wouldn't call it a myth, but I mean, it works in the same way. I was just waiting for you to get to the Bible.
Well, because
I thought it was a very good punchline.
yes, but it's not Homer in the Bible. I would claim that it's a kind of original, and I have a part in it. But Bible as a foundation text, it's not original. And I tried for years. We had a group at the Institute for Advanced Studies here in Jerusalem, and we have a book. You have quoted Gistrums and myself, published in 2003, Homer, the Bible and Beyond, foundational text. So it's something I have been working on for some time. So, but yes, I think yes. And the very concept of foundational text, it exists. It's a general concept.
Two little questions, I think related to one another. The first one is why then Vergil and not Quintus Ennius, who did more or less the same thing in his analysis, starting with the same story, becoming more and more historical as it comes near to the present, and for many years acting in a way as given a foundational myth of Rome. And the second question is, how much do you suppose Roman writers were already aware of the fact that there are such things as foundational texts, since they were working with poetics, Hellenistic poetics, in which ideology was one of the main topics discussed, and they were incorporating it. And ideology is, after all,
These are two difficult questions. The answer to the first is I don't know why. It's probably the reason lies in the system of education. If Vergil was accepted as a main text, or at the moment it was accepted as a main text in the system of education. This is very important. In Greece, this was a decisive factor, much more decisive than the Panathenai, etc. The education is everything. At least in the ancient in the ancient world, when it is standardized. I think this is the answer, and of course I am sure for specialists in Rome there are perhaps more specific reasons, but I think this is the main one. And the same in the Middle Ages. They read Vergil. They read it was one of the main texts. And as to the second, where it is difficult to say. Meantime, I found one clear criterion of foundational texts. They attach in exegetic writing, interpretation. We have enormous amount of scholar, so-called scholar kind of interpretation of Homer, and as compared to Homer, the scholar to other authors, if they existed at all, are minimal. And Vergil too, I think, as compared to the other Roman authors, he attached the largest amount of interpretation. So perhaps, but I don't think that they operated with such concepts as foundational texts. don't know. I have to think about it.
Okay. So we just ran out of time. So we thank again our lecturer. Thank you very much. And now there is dinner outside and everyone is invited.